3 years ago, Ethan and I sat at our kitchen table, divorce papers between us, while our two children, Lily and Max, played upstairs, blissfully unaware of the life-altering decision their parents were making downstairs. The kitchen, once filled with laughter, midnight snacks, and whispered dreams, now felt hollow, like a stage after the actors had taken their final bow. Our marriage hadn't collapsed overnight. It had worn down slowly, the result of sleepless nights with crying babies, financial stress, postponed dreams, and emotional distance we were too exhausted to bridge. There was no grand betrayal, no screaming matches to point to, just a gradual unraveling, so slow and quiet we barely noticed until the threads were entirely undone. The Ethan I had married was still there, somewhere under the layers of weariness and responsibility. I could glimpse him occasionally in the way he smiled at Lily's knock-knock jokes, or how he instinctively reached for Max's hand crossing the street. But between us, the warmth was gone. We had become partners in logistics, not in love. When I finally whispered, maybe we should get divorced, it felt like setting down a heavy burden neither of us realized we were carrying. Ethan didn't argue. His silence said more than words ever could. But when it came to the reality of separating, terror replaced relief. Lily was 6, just starting first grade. Max was 4, still believing that bedtime stories and warm milk could solve any problem. How could we shatter their world because we had failed at holding ours together? It was Ethan who broke the silence that night. What if we stayed? For them. The idea was absurd at first. Divorced couples didn't live together. But as we spoke through the night, the plan formed: separate rooms, clear boundaries, total honesty. We would no longer be husband and wife, but we would still be mom and dad under the same roof. For them, I repeated, the words feeling both noble and naive. Signing the divorce papers days later was a surreal experience. The courthouse clerk congratulated us out of habit, mistaking our broken smiles for those of newlyweds. We said nothing. What could we say? We drove home in silence. The same worn welcome mat greeted us, but the air inside the house was different, thicker, heavier, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. That night, I tucked Lily into bed. She clutched my hand and said, "Promise you'll always be here, Mommy." "Always," I whispered, meaning it with every fiber of my being. In the next room, I heard Ethan reading Max his favorite bedtime story, his voice steady despite the tremor I knew was in his heart. We had no idea how hard the road ahead would be. No idea how much strength it would demand, how many quiet heartbreaks it would cost. But as I stood in the doorway, listening to the gentle murmur of my children's dreams, I knew one thing for certain: for them, we would find a way. At first, everything felt surreal. We divided our rooms. Ethan moved into the guest room with its creaky bed and worn posters from his college days, while I stayed in the master bedroom. We approached our new life with an almost clinical precision, dividing bills, groceries, and chores as though drafting a corporate merger. Every detail was negotiated carefully, from who would take the kids to soccer practice to which weekends would be family weekends, and which would be individual weekends, where we alternated responsibilities. We created a color-coded calendar and stuck it to the fridge, each square filled with initials and activities, a patchwork of our new, fractured normal. Ethan and I became project managers of our family life, communicating primarily through texts and sticky notes left on the counter. Lily needs cupcakes for school Friday. Max's permission slip is due tomorrow. The first few weeks passed in a blur of awkward encounters and forced smiles. Meals were often eaten separately unless the kids insisted we sit together. Even then, conversation was stilted, careful, as if any wrong word might ignite something neither of us wanted to face. Max struggled the most. He didn't understand why Daddy wasn't always there to read him bedtime stories, or why he sometimes woke up to find only me at the breakfast table. He would wander the halls at night, clutching his stuffed bear, peeking into rooms until he found one of us to comfort him. Lily, older and more intuitive, observed everything. She didn't ask many questions at first, but the way she hugged both of us a little tighter, clung a little longer, told us she knew more than she let on. There were moments, fleeting and fragile, when it felt almost normal. A Saturday morning making pancakes, the kids giggling at Ethan's terrible jokes, syrup dripping from their chins. For a few golden minutes, it was easy to forget the signed papers locked in the drawer upstairs. But reality always seeped back in. Ethan would leave for a date with a strained smile, or I would retreat to my room with the hollow ache of loneliness echoing in my chest. We lived side by side, but miles apart. Late at night, after the kids were asleep, would sometimes stand in the hallway, staring at the closed door to Ethan's room. So close, and yet unreachable. I wondered if he ever stood on the other side, thinking the same thing. We had drawn new lines between us, lines we promised not to cross. Some days, they felt like necessary boundaries. Other days, they felt like prison walls. Still, we clung to the fragile structure we had built, hoping, for the children's sake, it would hold. We told ourselves we were doing the right thing. We told ourselves the sacrifices were worth it. But deep down, we both wondered, how long could we live like this before the foundation cracked beneath us? Living together after a divorce is like living with a ghost, reminders of what once was lurk in every corner. Sometimes I'd catch Ethan watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, a wistful sadness in his eyes. Sometimes I would smell his cologne drifting down the hall and feel an ache so deep I could barely breathe. Our house, which had once been our shared dream, became a museum of memories we tiptoed through. The wedding photo still hung in the hallway, a relic too painful to take down and too precious to erase. The coffee mugs with our initials sat side by side in the cabinet, untouched but not forgotten. It was even harder when we started dating other people. My first coffee date with someone new felt like betrayal. I spent an hour staring at my closet, debating what to wear, before finally choosing something neutral, something that wouldn't scream, "I'm trying too hard." When I told Ethan, out of courtesy, or maybe guilt, he gave me a tight smile and said, "Have fun," but his voice sounded hollow. When he started seeing someone, a woman named Harper he met through work, it felt like swallowing broken glass. I tried to act unaffected, but the first time she dropped by to pick him up, her laughter ringing down the hallway, I found myself locking myself in my bedroom, my heart pounding, fighting back tears. At night, lying awake, I questioned everything. Had we done the right thing? Were we modeling resilience for our kids, or teaching them how to cling to dead things out of fear? Meanwhile, the kids continued to grow in the shadow of our silent sacrifices. Lily's drawing started to feature two houses side by side. Ours and a mysterious, future house she hoped to have when we weren't so busy. Max asked if Mommy and Daddy would ever sleep in the same bed again. Every question was a dagger, and every answer was a clumsy patch over wounds we couldn't let them see. Despite the tension, there were moments that stitched the frayed edges of my heart back together. Watching Ethan teach Max how to ride a bike without training wheels, Lily and me cheering wildly from the sidewalk. Celebrating birthdays with clumsy homemade cakes and off-key singing. Christmas mornings with torn wrapping paper carpeting the floor, the kids' faces lit with joy. We weren't a traditional family. But we were still a family. Some nights, I'd find myself wondering what might have happened if we had fought harder for our marriage. If we had chosen to heal instead of retreat. But that door was closed now, locked, and maybe rightly so. Still, the ghosts of our past lingered, whispering of what had been, and what could never be again. And deep down, I knew, pretending they weren't there wouldn't make them go away. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday, disguised in the mundane chaos of life. Max had fallen off the jungle gym at school, and the nurse called me first. I was in the middle of an important meeting, my phone vibrating relentlessly against the polished conference table. Guilt gnawed at me as I ignored it once, twice, before finally excusing myself. By the time I got to the school, Ethan was already there. Max clung to him, tear-streaked and hiccuping, Ethan's arms wrapped tightly around our trembling son. The nurse gave me a look, a mixture of pity and subtle judgment, as she handed me the incident report. Ethan didn't say anything until we got to the car, but the tension was thick and suffocating. As we buckled Max into his car seat, his little face still crumpled in distress, Ethan finally snapped. "You should have been here sooner," he said, voice low but cutting. I bristled. I have a job, Ethan. So do I, he shot back. And yet, somehow, I made it here. The words hung between us like smoke, toxic and lingering. We drove home in silence, Max's quiet sniffles the only sound filling the car. That night, after the kids were tucked safely into bed, the dam burst. We argued in the living room, voices hissing in urgent, desperate whispers so the children wouldn't hear. Years of resentment poured out, accusations about who had given up first, who had cared less, who was only pretending for appearances. Maybe this isn't working, Ethan said finally, voice raw and exhausted. Maybe we're hurting them more by staying. The idea terrified me. The thought of truly splitting our family apart, of no longer being there for every scraped knee or school project or bedtime story, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I sank into the couch, burying my face in my hands. I don't know what else to do, I whispered. The house felt like it was crumbling around us, not with a bang, but with a slow, heartbreaking surrender. We sat in the dim light of the living room, neither of us speaking, the weight of our choices pressing down like a suffocating fog. For all our careful planning and noble intentions, we had underestimated how deeply tied we were to the life we had built, even if it was broken. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I lifted my head. Maybe, we need help. Ethan looked at me, skepticism and hope warring in his eyes. Not to fix us, I clarified quickly, feeling the sting of that truth, but to figure out how to do this better. For them. That night, we agreed to seek counseling. Not as a couple, but as co-parents. To learn new ways to communicate, to untangle the mess we had made without tearing apart the innocent hearts caught in the middle. We had reached our breaking point. But maybe, just maybe, it could be the beginning of something different. Something not perfect, but real. And perhaps, that would be enough. We started counseling the following week. Not couples therapy, we were beyond that, but co-parenting counseling. A space to unpack the tangle of our shared responsibilities, our old wounds, and the walls we had built to survive inside the same house without suffocating each other. At first, it was awkward. We sat in stiff silence on opposite ends of a beige couch, neither of us willing to admit how lost we felt. But slowly, week by week, we began to speak more honestly. About the guilt. The resentment. The exhaustion of pretending. About how much we still cared. Not about rekindling romance, but about being good parents, good people, even in the aftermath of something so broken. We made changes. Real ones. We restructured our schedules so we weren't constantly colliding in the hallways. We re-established boundaries not just for space, but for emotions. And most importantly, we stopped pretending everything was fine. We told the kids, gently and together, that mommy and daddy weren't getting back together, but we were working hard to be the best team for them. Lily cried quietly, asking if this meant she'd have to choose one of us. Max asked if we were still a family. Yes, Ethan said, pulling them both into his arms. Always. Just a different kind of family. Time passed. The days blurred into months. And somehow, the edges softened. We got better at being honest, not just with each other but with ourselves. I stopped flinching when I heard Harper's name, and Ethan stopped bristling when I mentioned a friend who made me laugh a little too loudly. We weren't best friends, but we had become something that mattered more, dependable. Trustworthy. Familiar. We learned to coexist in a rhythm that, while unconventional, gave our children a foundation that didn't crack beneath their feet. One night, about a year later, Lily crawled into my lap while we watched a movie. "Are you and Daddy still divorced?" she asked, sleepily. "Yes, baby," I said, stroking her hair. "But you still love us?" "Always." She smiled and rested her head on my chest. "Then I think it's okay." I looked over at Ethan on the other couch, Max snoring against his side, and he met my gaze. Not with sadness or regret, but something softer. A quiet pride in what we had managed to build, even from the ruins. "No, We weren't married anymore. But we were still a family. Maybe not the one we had planned. Maybe not the one people understood. But one full of love, resilience, and the kind of commitment that goes beyond vows. And for our children, and maybe even for ourselves, that was enough.